Shortly after making my way to Great Britain, I discovered a totally different world to my recent past. I was the happiest person there. For a little while I moved from one part of London before finally settling in Kensington. After my postgraduate studies, I would have loved to settle there permanently, but I was missing some of my friends as well as my beloved son back in Australia. I wished I could witness his growing up, but it was not to be. I wondered if he ever asked after me and what response he received. Had he been punished for asking? For I knew it to be the possible reality. I contemplated on returning to Australia, but worried that the circumstances might have changed for the worst. I was unable to see any light on the horizon, for everything in regard to my ex-family and the witnesses created a very miserable-looking picture. Initially, I intended staying in Melbourne for a short while and then return to London as soon as possible. I also considered going to Perth and perhaps even start something completely different. Then I contemplated further about how miserable my life had been. It was evening, the sun had set, and I was sitting on a simple wooden park bench, watching the fishermen's boats, and the seagulls doing their song and dance in the distance. I found myself daydreaming about those could-have-been moments and felt very lonesome. Long before my trip to London, I lived like a hermit, not making any sound, as if I did not exist. Yet I was not neglecting my friends, still meeting Ross, Mike, and others from time to time, often visiting Reg. It was sad to see his health deteriorating, and he seemed to have given up on life. Then I pondered about the unfortunate times I had to endure when living in Elwood with my daughters. During happier times, we celebrated their birthdays, and amongst the friends we had invited there was a young gentleman who had recently arrived in Australia, who I helped settle in the country. As mentioned, it was about then that I met an Italian girl, Rosa. I met her at weekends, or when she had spare time purely for companionship. There were times when she visited me, walking around the local shops, going to restaurants, and listening to music at my Toorak address. She often asked me if she could stay at my place at night. In truth, I was a little concerned about starting an affair so soon after my traumatic experiences, but felt that leaving a door open could be beneficial. There was an abandoned church in Toorak Road, and I would love to have purchased the old building, for I could turn it into a very special dwelling. Maybe even partially a gallery. However, I had to move out soon. I was going to miss that place, and the wonderful acoustics one enjoyed when making or playing music. Soon I was again accommodated in Williams Road, close to Toorak Road, for another short period of time. It was a studio flat, but was excessively humid, and I discovered that whenever it rained outside, it also poured inside, until one day it was literally flooded indoors. Our shoes were wet, and my television set was filled with rainwater. There was an abundance of black mold on all the walls. When I officially complained to the real estate agents, the Jewish owners were extremely furious about the tenants therein, believing that they must have used buckets of water to saturate the entire flat, ruining it. I needed to move out from there quickly, even storing my belongings somewhere else. When staying there, I remember the day so clearly when I presented Rosa with a beautiful silver necklace which had a few diamonds, and seeing her eyes sparkle was such a wonderful delight. I was so happy to have found and kept it long after I originally gave it to my daughter when she was in her pre-teens, and who, being outrageously angry with me for some reason, had thrown it out of the window. For some desperate and unexplored reason, Annette was often two-faced, and one could never trust her. However, her leg was probably due to multiple anomalies she genetically presented, or developed, depending on her insecurities encouraged by the lifestyle her mother promoted and her all-knowing peers she adored. I recall how she once had been cutting pieces from a beautiful fashionable white shirt which I had bought for her. She blamed the boys for cutting it when it was clearly not the case. And her form teacher asked her why she was doing it, for it would have cost her father a lot of money. Her teacher later informed me about it, saying that Annette always responded with, "So?" Magda's firstborn was clearly presenting similar characteristics to her mother. Another time, after I had moved out from there completely, as I walked to the flat in Williams Road to check if I had forgotten anything, I met two Jewish gentlemen. I told them about my friend who stayed in this unit currently being unwell, and I was going to check if anything was forgotten on his behalf. They hastily claimed that the man who lived there before was an idiot, as he had damaged their lovely flat. Loosely speaking of him, both uttered the same words at the same time, that he was either on drugs or a Muslim. One of them asked, "But you look like a decent man. Would you like to move in?" They were ever ready to accuse a man for damaging their property, which was already damaged. Perhaps they were looking for a dumb victim to pay their costs. They obviously did not realize that it was me they were talking about. I was now even more eager to get away from this absurdity and seek new adventures, to enable me to forget the bitter past which was haunting me. As I contemplated about my dark past, remembering how sad things were, I knew that my decision to travel overseas was the best thing for me. After lengthy negotiations, and on her faithful sisters' and brothers' advice, Magda once decided to try to get together with me, supposedly uniting the family, and I suggested trying it on a trial basis for a short while. I was very naive about this issue, as explained in more detail elsewhere, for that could not have been to rebuild the family unit, but rather either to rescue her wonderful children from the clutches of the devil, or to see if I could be persuaded to return to their so-called truth. Although I felt obliged to accept her return, I could not trust her at all, for she was still trying hard to convince the children that she could only speak the truth, and would make a better parent. In full confidence, I will say, without any assumption, one could see how one-track-minded she was, and I always had my doubts, thinking she had a hidden agenda. I can now see how naive and stupid I was when agreeing to let her stay at my place, at my home. As soon as she moved in, she started to complain about everything, including the lack of enough rooms for all of us. But the place was large enough for my daughters and me. However, if the family started to live together in earnest, we could do something about it. We were obliged to listen to her forever complaints, particularly bombarding me regarding my faithlessness to Jehovah, constantly attempting to embarrass and even interrogate me in front of the children regarding my presumed affairs with women at work and elsewhere. The children were again subjected to unnecessary and multiple arguments about issues of faith. I knew then that this endeavor was not going to succeed. A short while later, she decided to move out with Claude. It was completely her own decision. Claude was like a puppet, obeying her rules and regulations in absolute fear. I always believed that children should be nurtured and not tortured, But with my ex-wife, it had to be different, under the guise of so-called discipline. This trial period set the ball rolling, and the circumstances became worse than ever before with Annette and Birgit. Annette exhibited complete dislike towards Magda and was very unhappy about her return. I feel strongly that this so-called trial has influenced the girls badly, for both started displaying a form of mistrust and were extraordinarily resentful. On the other hand, they may have been pretending. I believe we should never have tried to get together. I was proved wrong in accepting her return. We were like two ice-cold stone pillars placed next to each other. In the human world, we always seem to hope, imagine, dream, and try, but often fail. I realized that I had no reason to stay in Melbourne, for it seemed I had nothing to hold me there any longer. I decided to get away and go to an overseas country, a place with similar social standards to those I had been brought up with, and settled on Great Britain. As I said earlier, even if it was going to be for a few months or several years, it could prove to be healing. After corresponding with some old friends in London, it looked very promising. I was going to use my corrected name when I finally got my new passport and other documents. Excited about my new adventure, I could now relax my frayed nerves, unnecessarily crowded mind, and become creative again. If and when I decided to return back, I could probably try somewhere I had not previously been. My memories kept repeating, and my head felt like a bee's hive. Particularly after my daughter's treatment of me like a heap of refuse and completely abandoning me, there was nothing to keep me in Melbourne. I always preferred honesty and sincerity in all things I did and thought. The variety of belief systems, myths and philosophies, historic and current, have taught me a few good things: tolerance, caring, charity, and acceptance of all people in the world, no matter what background they are from, no matter what race or color they belong to. Unfortunately, some people in important positions and their religious leaders have added a few twisted ideas into their faith in order to control the masses for their own purpose. According to historic research, the Romans, for instance, demanded all good Coptic Christians to think of the next world and their future rewards in the afterlife. They were advised not to be too materialistic, offering all their crops to their Roman masters, and were encouraged to believe it was the humbleness taught by Christ. Those who were convinced about it being the right choice lived in the harshest possible way to gain God's favor. In other words, living in a state of penury, dependent on charity. There are so many stories to ponder upon. Think about Johnstown and the mass suicide certain cult members committed. They followed their cult leaders exclusively, believing they were to be rewarded in the next world as the chosen to partake in God's kingdom as promised by their holy masters. They indeed committed the ugliest deed one can imagine. In this way they were supposedly going to avoid the wickedness of the world. This thought alone is dangerous to the world and humanity's future, for it leads to hopelessness in people's lives, driving them to do the unimaginable as an easy way out. Is this what God wants humanity to follow? Instead, people should work hand in hand for the betterment of their lives, for a fantastic future. Throughout the years, many cultist groups have been developed, dividing people and using so-called biblical truths as they interpret to suit their own ends. Without prejudice, they have done great harm to man's civilization. Many became the doomsday preachers in their dreamt of realities. Many still teach that the world has become evil and getting worse all the time. It is time to stop and take stock. Perhaps then one can discover how some of their leaders have been disillusioned and bitter about the world they were living in. Having turned to the Holy Scriptures to find comfort, have they really discovered what they were looking for, or have they discovered more doom and gloom, jealousies and much bloodshed in the name of a God they have imagined? The Bible is very flexible in the hands of people. You can describe all kinds of information as you imagine to promote your ideas by using it to your advantage, and others will blindly follow you. Do not leave our organization, for out there is danger and sin, and there is more, eternal damnation. When you consider what those groups and their leaders have been doing to this day, you can see how they have been surrounding the world with thoughts of complete hatred and devastation. We can see the results as witnessed by current worldwide events. Remember, energy cannot be destroyed, but can be manifested in many forms, and thought is a form of energy. What would happen if humanity increasingly thought of peace, understanding, and acceptance of each other? Can it be done? Yes, if humanity is able to wake up from their long-lasting slumber and open their eyes to reality. They can then perhaps see beautiful, uplifting things, having ideals based on unconditional love, which is applicable in their daily lives. I have no doubt that the human race is capable of living like a whole new generation. Will that ever happen? Yes, if they can refrain themselves from competition in destroying each other, lay down all their destructive weapons, and share a whole treasure of wonderful wisdom buried in their past. Perhaps then, at least symbolically, they can rebuild a magnificent stream of life on earth. Humans are capable of doing so, as they have proved throughout their history. It is also said that thoughts are things, and humanity should be encouraged to use them wisely. Do you notice how advanced humanity has become with their technological prowess? Now imagine if the whole of humanity would use all their powers to assist the needy and create unity in all their undertakings to overcome poverty instead of killing innocents with their war efforts. What a wonderful world they would be living in. You might think of me as an idealist, if you like, although I prefer to be known as a realist. I learned the values of tolerance, justice, and brotherly love in Judaism, the aspects of unconditional love and values of peace in Christianity, the humbleness and being at peace with all others in literatures of Islam, but I have never seen any such ideals being truly practiced in the world. Not even those wonderful considerations found in Buddhism, and the concept of following the middle path while doing all things unto others as we want them to be done unto us, has been practiced. Our world is filled with thoughts of destruction without accepting what is whole, loving, and healthy. This is not a negative assessment, it is the truth. Humanity has been surrounded with much negativity throughout their long and arduous past during their maturing years. In fact, we can confidently say that they are now experiencing the consequences of their mistakes. Does this sound outrageous and extreme? Let us consider just one aspect of earth dwellers we all share our lives with. The issue of discrimination, and we are all very familiar with this word. It comes in many forms and is usually the precursor towards negative assessment of others, judging them in a negative light according to our personalized standards. Conversely, judgment and discrimination are not the same, for we judge everything, every event, and people all the time by appreciating or not agreeing with them. For example, this color suits her better. That tea does not taste as ideal. The weather is so beautiful today, not like yesterday. When people start discriminating or assessing others according to their inabilities, educational backgrounds, race and language, comparing them with this or the other system, religion or nationality, as with our own supremacy or understanding as the only norm, we begin to generate the well-known human characteristics of dislike, enmity, jealousy, superiority complex, and separations. Sadly, this still remains the trend we humans have not yet fully advanced from. It has remained this way since man was introduced to this planet for the first time. Majority of these trends are inherited and fear-based. Fear has led people to the creation of multiple beliefs, more separations, and conflicts. In order to prove their supremacy, slavery and misery was invented. There were also those who, with thinking minds, although they have also been segregated and unrecognized, only a few were able to gather like-minded, but once again, more separations followed, and multi-belief systems fostered. This is a vitally important tableau for the awakened to take note of. Human conflicts, enmity, and resentfulness will not help. They need to observe this anomaly together and unite before it becomes too late. Once people start the process, others from different recesses of the universe and dimensions will be able to begin to fast-track progress into a brighter future. And that is when humanity will see the light, their knowledge increase to superior heights, their lives expanded, talents and prowess becoming higher than what they have ever known. Let us not forget that humans have the capacity to improve and become highly advanced beyond their wildest dreams. This is not science fantasy, it is the reality. When you think at the current world of humanity more realistically, what do you see? Consider the worldwide political systems, religions, social ills, and suicidal tendencies among people, and tell me where we are now. I am sure that you are also thinking like me, but what are we doing about it? Do worldwide military intervention strategies assist humanity to live in peace? Did we create more fear, perhaps? Has any type of discrimination, be it color, race, belief, or gender preference, helped men to live in peace and be inventive? Consider also the cultist movements, which separate people as good or bad, perhaps even shunning them, leading to suicide. They are one of the greatest culprits towards man's tragic downfall. And again, this is said without discrimination or condemnation. Religious and political intolerances do not help. Without being critical, today's belief systems have led mankind to the brink of extinction. Ponder on how many suicide bombers have killed so many innocents because of their supposed beliefs. How long will this continue? Think about what misery cults like the Witnesses have created. The holy book they speak of holds a mirror to their faces, showing them where they are now in the light of their long and troublesome history, but which they seem oblivious to. Holy books have also been used to promote separatist, discriminative ways, whereas they can be utilized as principles in their purity for humanity to follow towards unity and peace. Man's belief systems have failed him. Their separations, political, socio-economic systems are crumbling. What is left? I shall remain neutral, not taking sides with any religious system or deity to adore and worship. I never desired to force my own ways on anyone, not even my children, family, or friends. Some friends have accepted me as I was with all my thoughts. Others, just like my family and children, have condemned me forever as a wrongdoer. I learned the value of tolerance and patience throughout my youth, and the value of forgiveness, which does not indicate any form of self-weakness. Most importantly, I learned the value of love. Going back to my story, when in Britain, my attention was particularly directed to those wanting to emigrate to Australia, almost all of whom were talking about Perth and Western Australia. Although I had been there several times to see how that city scored, I needed to discover more about Perth, for something seemed to be very special about it. I pondered for a while, thinking that my next destination could therefore be the West. Besides, I seemed to hear a youth's voice speaking to me intermittently, almost begging me not to abandon him. But had I abandoned anybody? Once I had a family, 2 beautiful daughters, and a son I did not know well, for he had unlawfully been taken away. Yet he would probably sound like that youth I kept hearing within my imaginative mind, calling me Dad. That voice echoing in the distance most certainly belonged to a boy, and not the girls, for my daughters were so severely conditioned to see only the ugly things about me, which were incorrect, for they were forced to believe that I did not care for anybody under the influence of an evil source. I suppose I was a bad dad for not allowing them to only eat junk food, or encouraging them to keep themselves clean and healthy. And the worst thing was that I did not allow their boyfriends to sleep with them. It was my parental responsibility to watch over them until they reached a certain age, but I was not interested in preventing them from having basic human rights. Annette's attitude was progressively aggressive towards me, and because she could not get me hurt, or have everything only her own way, she became more and more hateful, for she could obviously not be any other. As I said, she only knew what hatred was, for that was her love. But was she not emulating the characteristics of the witnesses indirectly, as inherited and fully practiced within her family? However, I was never a part of that family, separated and shunned. It felt as if this behavior was genetically transferred to Annette through her mother, and if someone questioned her why she hated her father, she did not know how to answer other than shrug her shoulders, saying, "I don't know." I felt shattered, not knowing how best to deal with the situation at hand, and hopefully repair what was broken. When I suggested she stay with her mother for a while, I honestly believed it could help her in the long run, as she was obviously not happy with me. As I explained before, she had the tendency to exaggerate everything, thus creating mountains out of molehills. She took all my suggestions as if I was throwing her out, always ready to attack me, and at least destroy my reputation. My beloved child behaved like a monster towards me, yet I still cared for her welfare. In reality, I had no answers why it was so. I could not fully understand why she developed such behavioral characteristics of telling lots of fabricated stories. Was it to make her look interesting, gain the sympathy of her friends, or appear to be no less than them? Repeating myself, this became so evident after her abduction by those so-called friends, and later being deposited in her mother's alleged care. Who knows what lies have been told to their mother, who was ever ready to believe in anything spoken against me? What Annette had been subjected to by her German grandparents as an infant was having a definite effect on her now. Magda took the whole story to her only friends, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and in turn they advised her what to do and how to live. Although my daughters lived with me a lot longer than my beloved son, they were not able to understand or appreciate me, nor did they ever acknowledge me. They were well conditioned by the cult of Jehovah. Even my dear child Birgit chose her mother's beliefs, and after her sister's departure also left, following her mother's advice not to associate with her father, therefore writing on a piece of newspaper the words that I was meant to understand easily, as she later claimed. It was apparently better for her to go away, and that I could live with their memories. I believe that their heart was always with the witnesses and their mother, despite their choice to live with me. It still hurts. I should never have expected anything truthful or reliable any more, only their attempts to justify their falsehood. The voice I heard, perhaps only in my imagination, could not have been hers, because none of them had any genuine love towards me, and this way Magda and the witnesses she associated with were very happy with their achievements. I was certain that the voice I heard could only be Claude's. It was almost like a communication through the unknown elements belonging to the universe, making it possible for us to hear each other. I was sure that one day it would become clear, and we would all know the truth. If what I imagined was real, would he also feel my thoughts? Would he feel how much I loved him? Would he sense that I had forgiven all the hurts I had been subjected to? I also knew that they were going to be brainwashed further, to completely forget me as if I did not exist. Since I was painted with so many lies from within the fantasy creation of a few short-sighted humans, I was considered as the evil without it being so. I am certain that it was due to my looks and different viewpoints on life. For instance, consider the German government's warning to Magda when we got married about my alleged Muslim heritage, and therefore me possibly being a violent man who would restrict his wife in living a decent life, as observed all around today's world, particularly in Middle Eastern countries. Furthermore, Jehovah's Witnesses could only separate and break down those who they judged in the name of God as sinners, thus leading to family breakdowns and personal fears about being destroyed during so-called Armageddon. I could almost hear them shout, "Stay with our organization, for outside is full of desolation and destruction." More members meant more strength and power. Anybody dropping out from our magnificent organization of God is disastrous for our leadership. I therefore knew I had lost my entire family to their fantasy creations. I knew that my daughters had the tendency to tell believable stories of untruths when they deliberately tried to play us parents against each other. I was determined to no longer believe in their fantasized views against their mother, and decided to ignore their crocodile tears, hoping that one day they would mature in intellect. However, what were they feeding their mother with? After all the experiences I was subjected to, I could not trust them, but hoped that one day they would become wiser. I felt extremely sad about my son, who was so young, gentle-natured, and could easily be sucked into a restrictive system wherefrom he would never be able to escape when he was older. A restrictive lifestyle under absolute witness control and multiple punishments would turn anybody into a restrictive person giving no chance for others to be themselves. Such a person would not know how to be happy and make others feel comfortable. At this stage, I could only hope he would grow up quickly and see the reality of things for himself. As soon as I decided to return to Australia, I felt as if I was listening to a choir of people from distances far and yet so close, singing a song of Perth. I had never experienced anything like that before, and took it as being inspired from the thought universe that there was perhaps something special waiting for me there. At this time, I had no idea and no physical reference points concerning my children's whereabouts. I was sure that Magda, with her brothers and sisters, would do everything possible to keep the children away from me. Every one of them sang the only song well known to them. Nobody judges anybody. Is that why they have shunned me forever, just like many others, all around the world? They proved themselves to be extremely judgmental and extraordinarily discriminative. I concluded that they obviously had no human feelings to understand my or anybody else's standpoint. My first daughter was extremely hateful towards her mother for being guided to believe in the ways of her close friends with their biased ideas. Also very hateful towards her father, for he did not fulfill her personal needs, and did not allow her boyfriends to scratch her itch. Alas, within her unstable mind, she became bitter and hateful to everybody. In reality, she was a hate machine, and I cannot forget how she attempted to murder her mother with a pair of scissors. However, I cannot be too sure, as this story was relayed by Birgit, who also told many lies. I trusted that her mother knew that it was Annette's own decision to commit such an evil deed, for I never encouraged it, nor would ever do so. I hoped that Magda had reported this incident to the legal authorities in order to curb the unusual hatred her wonderful daughter displayed. But sadly, knowing how naive and vulnerable Magda was, I believe she probably thought it was instigated by me. The truth is that Annette was deceptive, even at that age. Sadly, Birgit was not much different, perhaps even thinking she could control her mother's mind by telling her stories which Magda believed as if true. Even as a child, Birgit became a hopeless liar in almost all aspects of her life by imitation. How did I know, I hear you ask? By discreetly psychoanalyzing, I assessed her when she was fantasizing things and events as she learned from her sister or school friends, telling me how she loved me on one side and yet on the other telling untruths about me, particularly when in her mother's presence. They knew their mother did not want to hear anything nice about me, and so telling her what she wanted to hear was justified in their eyes. I have known them claim to have seen me perform magic to hurt others, something which I wholeheartedly opposed, but also knew that Magda and her friends believed Birgit's fantasies as being true without question and any validity. My interests and studies into the science of the mind were always considered by opposers to scientific knowledge as something akin to soothsaying or conjuring up spirits. As mentioned before, my daughters spent a lot of time with me when still very young, but forgot everything nice that happened during their childhood. They chose to remain ignorant about my standpoint and did not really know anything about me. Their dreaming minds created a unique world of fantasy in which they considered me as an evil magician who conjured up evil spirits casting evil spells, none of which was true, but tell it to Birgit and hear her deny it, condemning her father as evil, as per Magda's misguided beliefs. My daughters were continually subjected to hypnotic suggestions by everything repeatedly being preached, every time their mother and her associates had access to them. However, I am not going to blame my daughters for their ungainly behavior, for it is fostered by the real evil created by Jehovah's Witnesses. The truth of the matter is that, like many other parents, I had joked about things and played games to entertain my friends, but obviously they took everything very seriously under some instruction. Unadvised from her associates, Magda was constantly asking them if their father had done this or the other magic act, and to keep their mother appeased, they exaggerated their stories in addition to a plethora of lies, infuriating her further against me. She would then take the whole story to her brothers, and they would advise the children that their father's practice of magic was evil, which they should avoid. As this model was constantly adhered to, it became their ultimate truth. This was most certainly what had become their belief, for when I was told things which I had supposedly conjured up, I was taken aback by its incongruity, but Birgit had a solution for that as per her mother's directives. The devil had taken her father's mind due to his delving into spiritualism and magic. Now she was telling me that I was not a good person when we lived together. Obviously, her personalized lies had to be rendered into my personal characteristics. Otherwise, how could she get out of being found out, telling untruths all along? How would she feel if her mother discovered that Birgit had been feeding her with multiple lies about her father? If Magda's memories are intact and she is open-minded, she might be able to discover the truth. I suppose one should never expect Birgit to correct her ways, for I had to accept their assumptions as my truth to satisfy their needs, perhaps even apologize for my alleged wrongs. This will never happen. Their ability to convince their mother was remarkable. They only wanted to believe that I was like them, telling stories. Whatever colored glasses they were wearing, their world was likewise colored. Unfortunately, Birgit also came across as being the most two-faced young lady ever since that meeting at the Meyer stores after many years of separation, although I wished she would change for the better. I loved her as my child and had forgiven all her weaknesses, but alas, I could not forget those past memories. Years later, she still believed that her father was telling fables, and that she allegedly knew when he told a lie. I was deeply saddened by their hateful characteristics. This naturally made me decide not to have anything to do with such treacherous behavior any longer. Obviously, she could only tell lies about her father telling lies, probably treating it like a game. I am certain that whatever fabrications she made up would be believed by her mother and young brother, thinking that perhaps being a young man, he was expected to be silly enough to accept anything as true. They believed in their own self-made dark fantasies so much that they became their only reality and an integral part of their being. If I could turn back the clock and had a chance to explain things to them, I would tell them what the honest truth was. Alas, going back in time is physically impossible. But maybe in the near future such time travel will become possible. Who can tell? One thing is definitely true. Past could not, nor should ever be attempted, to change. Whatever was done remains.